Welcome back, everybody, to episode number 20 of the Capital Press Club Legacy Podcast. I'm Dr. Colin Campbell. Thanks for joining us today. We wanted to start with Today in Black History. Well, we have MC Lyte, the rapper, the legendary rapper who started many years ago as one of the preeminent women rappers of the genre, is turning 54 today, and she just released a new single actually as well that she's promoting. So we wanted to give her a happy birthday shout out. We also wanted to commemorate Alexander Miles. Alexander Miles was a person who invented the electric elevator. He did not invent the elevator, let's be clear, but he did invent several improvements to the elevator and the way that they operate and the way that their doors open and close. So we wanted to just give a shout out to him as well for his contributions to America in the way that we use elevators. I'm sure all of us who are watching have used elevators at one time or another. So thank you to Alexander Miles. Now, before we jump into our topics, I wanted to welcome our man, Derek Kenny, my man behind and in front of the scenes. Good to see you again. Hey, how are we doing, man?
It's good to be seen, and thanks for having me here again, Colin. Looking forward to talking with you today.
Yeah, we've got a lot to talk about today. We've got first up, we wanted to talk about that interview with Vice President Kamala Harris and NABJ. And of course, NABJ has been in the news a bit this year because of its interview with the former President Trump in July, where it got kind of controversial, where the issue of race was brought up and dissected. And of course, he had his grievances with the way the interview was run. So now we see an interview with Kamala Harris with NABJ in Pennsylvania, I believe Philadelphia, where she fielded questions about the economy. She was a little bit demure about how she felt about reparations, but altogether, she wanted to talk about issues that she felt would impact the Black community, and she felt that NABJ would be a good platform to talk about these issues. So what did you think of this interview, DK? Was there anything that stood out to you of note?
Well, a few things. One, I think as we look at the interview, we need to look at it juxtaposed to the Trump interview, where we had a lot to say about that interview. Not only about the controversy that came from his answers. Of course, he has ways of answering questions that are very confrontational or controversial, to say the least, right? But we did also speak about the makeup of the interview panel. In the past, I think you mentioned that it was notable that NABJ selected all women journalists as opposed to having one male. In this case, NABJ had a couple of men, in addition to a lady, woman interviewing as well. So that's different. And then also maybe. In another interview, we criticized not necessarily the interviewers, but we talked about the interview where Kamala Harris was being interviewed on, was it CNN? And she was being interviewed in like a post-apocalyptic diner where there's mugs on tables and it's dark in the background and it's very unpresidential, or it's not something that you'd see that signifies that you're interviewing a potential president of the United States of America. The background was dark. There was no American flag. There was no patriotism espoused. It was Kamala was sitting at a table where she looked smaller than the interviewers, and so I think all of those things that we criticized, or that we may have had comments about in the other interviews that we saw with Kamala Harris, this time was different. I can tell this time that someone on her team made sure that she looks presidential. So if you look at this scene where she is this time, so a communications person, you have the American flag, the literal American flag in the background. You have also a nice, beautiful, I don't know if it's a globo or whatever, American flag and American type of signage in the background behind her, giving her more of a polished look, more polished interview look, as opposed to where you're interviewing potentially the next president of the United States. You just have a background of a diner, so that's much improved from CNN interview. And I'll say that it's a bit different from the Trump interview, and when we look at the content of who's doing interviewing. And so you look at some of the images from the interview, you can see also, the people that are interviewing her looking straight ahead. There was a live audience. Audience was a bit smaller, which I thought was nice and appropriate.
And
But I thought the
mostly
studio
students, right?
environment was nice. Yeah. So what did you think
Yeah,
about it? How did you
yeah,
feel about?
yeah. I think there were mostly students in this audience. You could tell that it was framed almost like a talk show format, which
Hmm.
seemed a little bit more comfortable for her, even though she was spaced at a distance from her interviewees, unlike the Trump interview where they seemed a bit closer together, where Rachel Scott and
Yeah.
Trump seemed to be a bit closer together. She was spaced out a bit more here. I'm sure, though, that logistically it was easier to cut from camera to camera and get some of those close-up shots because of that reason, where you had a little bit of space to work with, where you could
Hmm.
actually be a little bit more accurate or more aesthetic with the framing, of course. And I think that the interview was pretty smooth. There was no confrontation, unlike the Trump interview. This one seemed to go rather smoothly. Again, she did kind of evade where she felt about the reparations issue. I think that some journalists were a little bit, I wouldn't say annoyed, but they probably thought that she could have answered that question a bit better when it came to that. She also talked about economic building, which I think was important, an issue that a lot of people wanted to hear from her because the
Hmm.
critique was that she wasn't speaking to media enough or that media was not reaching out enough. So here we have members of the media really trying to ask her those issues that they felt would resonate most with Black society. So I think that was a positive about it. And of course, yes, the aesthetics. You have the American
Hmm.
flag in the background, which does make her look more presidential. She looks more comfortable. She is herself. So, just size comparatively, there really isn't someone right next to her to do that with. So she kind of stands alone, looks very independent, looks more competent in that way.
Hmm.
Visually, I'm not mentally or emotionally or anything like that, but
Of course.
visually, just looks like she can stand on her own and that there's, she's not like an appendage where I think in the CNN interview, it almost looked like that because of the way that she was framed in such a diminutive way. It just kind of seemed odd. Here, she was able to kind of be highlit in a way so that she stands out and she looks bolder. So I think that worked well for her.
Right.
So I think, like you said, whoever was on her team or NABJ's team, they said, okay, let's do a bit better job here, learning from the experiences of the Trump interview
Right.
and CNN interview. Let's see if we can elevate this interview a bit more. And I think they
Hmm.
achieved that,
Yeah.
especially when you're looking at the aesthetics.
Right. And that way you can focus on the issues at hand. And again, we're nonpartisan. I don't know whether she gained any voters or not, and we don't care about that. What we do care
Right.
about is that the people that had jobs to do that were communications in nature did their jobs well. And I think in this case they did. So we're going to give them a round of applause
Hey, there we
from
go. Give
from
them a round of applause.
CPC and
Yeah.
Dr. Colin Campbell. Yep.
Yeah, give them a round of applause. They also talked about the conflict as well, the
Hmm.
Israeli Hamas conflict, I guess more accurately. They did ask her about that too. So again, ask her some of the harder questions.
Right.
Now, journalism critique, could they ask her tougher things, be more pressing? Sure.
Hmm.
I don't think I'll discuss that now. But as far as tackling some of those issues that people have been talking about and the issues that they wanted to hear answers from her on, they were able to address most of those. I do think there are other areas that they could have pressed her a bit more on. I'm not sure if they went over questions. I would think that they didn't, though, because
Hmm.
there was also a lesson to be learned from that. If you remember, there was a radio station that asked Biden some
Canned
preview
questions. Yeah.
some canned questions, and they got in trouble over that, of course, when dealing with issues of journalistic integrity. So I don't think they did that here, but I also feel like there probably could have been some tougher questions when it came to economic struggles, war budgeting, things like that, foreign policy. So we will see. As the campaign, of course, election day is just a few days away, less than a month away. We'll see what happens with other members of media and how they try to uh, speak to Vice President Harris, how they try to phrase questions, and we'll see if there's any kind of progression or evolution in the way that they connect with her and communicate various messaging when it comes to issues that a lot of voters are paying attention to or are curious about when it comes to her standpoint and her point of view.
Oh wow! All right.
Yeah. So I think that she also did another interview on a streaming platform, which we will talk about in another episode. So she's continuing to do these interviews, I think, with a little bit faster pace as the day of fate is approaching. All right. So
Yeah, indeed.
yeah, yeah. I think so. Very interesting, though. And I wonder if people think media are doing a good job. We know that right now, media are one of the just one of the least trusted institutions right now when you look at various issues dealing with law enforcement or media or healthcare, something like that. Media is kind of ranking low. It probably is still above Congress, I think. I have to look at the latest polls on that, but I wonder
Mhm.
if people's feelings about how the media are interviewing politicians, if they feel that they're doing a good job. And I think that when you're seeing more politicians on the campaign trail, we just saw former President Obama on the campaign trail today as well. If that they're trying to get the media to steer, to trying to steer the media to their messaging. I do wonder about that. Same with former President Trump as well. If they think the media are really effective in carrying their message, and I bet you it does go along partisan lines. I'm not really sure about that.
And the question that you have there is significant because, whether or not you trust media, it's a question of also what do you consider media? Are you thinking traditional media, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, or you're talking about the blogger down the street or the TikToker that has news and information for you that they've generated themselves that aren't necessarily educated or traditionally trained journalists. So
Right.
it's a question of when you start looking at how people are getting information and sometimes they're being failed or they're receiving information that's not true, and does that make them learn to not trust media? And are they lumping all media together? When you think about media, are you thinking about the news organizations, or are you thinking about news organizations and what you're getting from social media from various sources? Because news organizations may have millions of views. Someone on social media may have millions of views. However, the news organizations on cable or on broadcast TV are ruled by, at least to some degree of integrity or journalistic principles, whereas some of the bloggers or some of the micro bloggers or content creators are not ruled necessarily by the same degree of integrity when it comes to fact checking and ensuring that they're providing good information and timely information and that they're not presenting something in a subjective fashion. And that's where I really wonder if people, when they say they don't trust the media, are they saying they don't trust the traditional media, or are they saying they don't trust any media? Where now you're thinking about social media as well, where you have influencers like Elon Musk who has 195 million followers, and he takes a day to espouse all of his truths to the general public, of which many of them may or may not be factual in nature. How does that work?
Yeah, I did want to jump into Elon Musk and his use of X, but before I wanted to go into that, I don't know if you saw that Ray J, Brandy's brother, who was famous for a special video that was released years ago.
Really? He was? Okay. Oh, I didn't know
Coming
that.
out,
Okay.
yeah, he's starting his own podcast. So speaking of various content creators in a journalistic sense, the podcast or the piece of the podcast I saw, he was well dressed, had on a suit. He even
Hmm.
put on a pair of glasses. I've never seen him wear glasses before. And he asked his audience, almost like in the third person, he said, I'm sure some of you are wondering why Ray J is in the news. So now he's placing himself in the space of journalism as almost a journalist. He's trying to present himself as a journalist with a background and I believe a desk that he sits at. And so now people who may not know about some of the journalistic standards that are supposed to guide the industry may consider him on the same level as a Gail King or
Hmm.
a Wolf Blitzer or something like that, depending on how often you watch him, your access to him, the subject matter that he might be interested in, right? I mean, so that can be a little bit, definitely a little bit jarring, I would think, for some people to really discern what is real journalism and what is not real journalism. So when we think about Elon Musk, for example, and just how he has taken over Twitter, remember he sold it, or he bought it rather, in 2022. He bought it for, I believe, $44 billion,
Hmm.
and now he has. Some people said wrecked it. I know several people who have logged off or signed off or canceled their accounts because in his view, he is encouraging free speech. But of course, there are certain things that he censors on there. If you criticize him too much or criticize his political beliefs, that could be censored. There's definitely a lot more misogyny on that platform now, more racism, more xenophobia than there was before when it was under Jack Dorsey and his collaborators. Uh, it seems that Musk has kind of taken it over and has used it as his own personal platform, even though right now I think it's estimated to have about 540 million followers around the world. So,
Oh, wow.
estimate what, a half billion almost of
Yeah.
followers in the world. So there are a lot of people on there, and he has what, almost 200 million followers or something. I can't remember
Yeah.
how many
I
users.
believe he's close to 195 million, according to this article that was
195 million.
reflecting on his day where he had 145 tweets. And it goes back to what do people consider media when we're looking at what's the media? Because of course you had the Rupert Murdoch of the day and the Ted Turners that owned media networks that share news, and to a certain degree, they could influence the content of the news. But now you have a guy that owns maybe one of the what could be considered one of the largest media networks in the world, which is X or Twitter, that can now directly influence, not superficially fire somebody, hire somebody, suggest story ideas, but to change the narrative by banning people or giving people access or more access to his network that has more constituents than many countries have residents. uh,
Right.
yeah. What do you have? What is that? How does this really shape the narrative? How does this reshape the way, as communications professionals, what do we need to do to level the playing field? What are we to do?
I think as individuals, it would be tough to really mitigate the influence of a platform that has so many followers. I think that in as an individual, we can only do what we have time to do or
Yeah.
what fits into our finances, and that is still following journalistic standards. Of course, ignoring or being very mindful of spreading misinformation or disinformation. We know that that is a huge problem within media, especially now in the advent of social media, and where everyone can just set up a camera and just say what they want, which is why we have so many different conspiracy theories floating around, where we have so many people that give their points of view that are sometimes accepted as truth before they are verified. And so, because of that, in the academic space, we have classes that deal with media literacy in countries like, I believe it's Sweden. I can't remember if it's Sweden or Switzerland. It's one of the SW countries. I want to say Sweden, where they teach media literacy at a very young age. They teach children to have critical thinking skills so that they can discern what's truthful and what's not in media.
Mm.
Here, the steps to understand what is veridical in our news or not takes more steps because we aren't really given those skills or trained in those skills from young ages. We do it as an adult. I've taught media literacy as a college class, but of course, growing up, it was before social media, so they didn't have. And I
Right.
really haven't heard that as a part of standardized curriculum to teach children how to discern true messages in media and mendacious statements in media. It's a little bit troubling because, again, anyone nowadays with a smartphone or a tablet or a laptop can set up a camera and stream news, well, stream content rather, not news, content from their device and treat it like news, and then it can be accepted like news. And of course, when you have a platform like X where people are tweeting or posting all kinds of information, it's up to the consumer to understand what's real and what's not. And a lot of us may not even have the time to do that because we're so busy with trying to maintain other parts of our lives. Some of us may be too lazy to do it. Some of us may not have proper ways to do it. So we
Right.
accept what we're seeing, a blurb, a headline, a quick video that may even have fake elements within the video, like deep fakes or fake
Hmm.
audio. There's so many ways that videos can be doctored, and people accept those as truthful videos. Again, technology is even going to get better with that, where lip syncing and accents and tone of voice will be so accurate it'll be almost impossible to detect whether or not something is truthful or
Yeah.
if it's totally fabricated. So, I think to answer your question, I think we have to be vigilant. We have to call out perhaps what is fake. As far as journalists are concerned, if we are really trying to be responsible, maybe we would create our own channels, our own streaming platforms, so
Yeah.
that we just produce news that we know that is up to a specific journalism standard of truth and integrity to combat some of the dross that's already out there.
Right.
Again, it would have to be a lot of us, right?
Hmm.
You have legacy media too, but they also have their own interests.
Hmm.
Legacy media, we're talking about corporate media, so they may have their own uh, their own biases when it comes to what news is covered and how it's covered.
Right.
So, and we already know that some of the broadcast companies have their stations produce all of the same content, or they're these must air segments where they have to show news that every other station within their network is showing. Of course, that shows a bias, right? That takes away some of the diversification of news information and information sharing that's out there if you have all of your stations producing and airing the same content simultaneously. So again, it comes down to the individual.
Hmm.
One person combat it? No. Could we collectively do it as individuals? Yes, but it would take a mindful effort to do so.
Well, I think it's great that people have us out there now because we're going to tackle some of the fake news stories out here that are hitting people at some of the most vulnerable times where they're seeking news and information, but they're getting them from the wrong places. All right. There's just recently we kind of helped to debunk and look at the Trump statement where he alleged, or his vice president, his running mate alleged that Haitians were eating cats and dogs. Immigrants were eating cats and dogs, and that was a fake news
He
story.
actually he
Yeah,
actually said it during the debate. Trump, the
right.
former president himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you heard the song, by the way, Derek?
No, no, I've not
There was
heard
at
the
a party the
song.
other day.
I
There was a
don't.
song about that. They're eating the cats. They're eating the
Oh, I
dogs.
did hear that. Yeah, I did hear
You hear
that.
that? They took a
Where
house beat back.
they took his voice and they put him in. Yeah, I'm gonna look that up and see if I can find that before we're done here. But we have another fake news story today,
Yeah.
uh, and it has to do with the hurricanes and the technology that some people believe may be influencing the hurricanes. And I'll leave it to you to pick that up.
Yeah, so this news came out of, well, let me put news in air quotes. Let me just say information. Came out about, I believe, Helene, and of course, the next hurricane to really wall up the west coast of Florida and the Gulf region, Hurricane Milton, where these massive weather systems are passing over Florida. And you have members of the public who are saying that these weather systems may have been purposely created to sway elections or to devastate certain areas, so to take them out of the electoral process. Because as we know, it's less than a month away. And so, what they're saying is that there are these ionically charged particulates that are being put into the atmosphere to create these high or low pressure systems, which then create massive clouds and then grow into these Goliath weather systems, like we saw with Hurricane Milton, where it actually reached a Category 5 status. It was downgraded to, I believe, a 3 once it hit landfall. But of course, that devastation was only exacerbated because of the fact that Helene had already hit several days before. And so you had people in Florida who were reeling and really suffering from being hit by these hurricanes, massive power outages, hundreds of thousands of people out of power. I think it exceeded 1 million people without power in that area. I actually have
Wow.
some relatives who live in the Tampa area,
Oh,
and they're
wow.
okay, fortunately. Yeah,
Okay.
they used a generator to get through the storm, but I did receive a text yesterday saying that they're okay. So I'm very thankful for that. But of course, this is not to overlook that I believe it might be more than a dozen people who perished in the hurricane. So of course we feel for them. That the loss of life as a result of the hurricanes, Helene and Milton. But the information that's being put out there about scientists putting these ionically charged particles into the air, of course, is not true. Now, they do have technologies called cloud seeding that they've used, I believe, in certain parts of Africa or other parts, or excuse me, China, I believe, has used
Yeah.
cloud seeding. I
And
don't know about,
and and
but I
what's
think
what's the name of the popular city for vacations now in the Middle East? Dubai. Dubai uses
Dubai,
cloud seeding. Yeah, I believe so.
okay, Dubai uses
Yep.
cloud seeding too.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that now, so that is a technology, right?
Hmm.
That's true, but it's used for smaller weather occurrences to create rain, to create water to fall by precipitation. But to create a hurricane, that's not true. And that would take a much more massive undertaking to do something like that. But that is what's being put out there in order to sway voters' minds. And so this is the misinformation. And at this point, it would be disinformation because it's been widely debunked. So people who still share that as truth are really out there motivated by disinformation to really give false messaging to the public. And I think that's obviously a disservice to people who are consuming content out there, especially people who need help, especially people who want to make informed decisions. Putting this information out there is really deleterious, I think, to the public. But yet, it will still exist. People putting out false information. And again, we have to combat it, I believe, as journalists, but to really do it in in a stronger or bolder way, maybe there need to be policies put in place. I don't know what those policies are, but I do think there needs to be some type of regulation for putting out news that can really harm the public at large.
All right. Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. And speaking of the public at large and fake news and information that needs to get out there, I think we have something that
Is
might
that our
be.
news of the day? The cloud seeding stories are fake news of the day.
Nope. I think we need this. Let's see if I have it. Oh
Yeah,
gosh, can you hear that?
I don't hear anything. No song because he does more like
People of
more like
Springfield, please don't eat my cats. Why would you do that? Eat something else.
So,
People of Springfield, please don't eat my
so,
dog. Here's a catalog of other things to eat.
so this is one of the things that came
so
up when I
yeah.
looked
But
for
see,
that
this
song.
one too. Even like this song, right? I know it's a joke and it's a
Yep.
spoof or a parody, but at the same time, he's telling people of Springfield not to eat pets, almost like it's a given that that's actually what's going on,
Yeah.
and he's trying to encourage them to not do it. But it's not happening. That's the problem. It never happened. Now, again, I think we did talk about this in a previous podcast that there was some woman who seemed like she was dealing with some mental issues who did not live in Springfield, who was not Haitian, who may have eaten a cat, I think. But again, nothing to do with this migrant population that is looking for a better way to live in a town of Springfield, called Springfield, Ohio, where they have been largely welcomed in that town because they needed more people to boost the commerce in that town. It was a fading town, a lot of businesses boarded up. And what the Haitian migrants did was rejuvenate some of the economic
Oh
activity in that
wow.
town under a legal status. I don't want to say visa, I don't know the technicalities yet, but it was a legal process in the way that they came. So these weren't like undocumented, or what some people like to call illegals, which we know is again a charged word, but people are saying it. These wouldn't fall into that category. These are people who were given a distinct protected status, legally protected status, to go to Springfield, Ohio, to reside there, boost the town, create businesses, be entrepreneurial, where they are not eating people's pets, but yet still they were accused of doing that by people who were severely misinformed. And so this song, again, I get that it's funny, but it almost assumes it plays
Right.
on that stereotype. And for those people who actually believe it, they may
Hmm.
think, oh, this is a song that is actually a plea from people who are still deciding to
Right.
consume pets as food to not do it. The song I was talking about was more making fun of the former
Is
president
it?
for even saying that. It was just like just using his terms. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, and then they played,
In
house beat.
Springfield, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. Eat the cat, eat the cat.
Oh,
They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats.
No.
Eat the cat, eat the cat.
This
They're
might be
eating
it.
the cats, they're
Yeah.
eating the dogs. Eat the cat, eat the cat.
Is that the one?
It's kind of a catchy beat if you think about it. I mean,
Seeing red, so don't push me. Ain't Donald Trump.
All right.
You know,
Yeah. The guy has a whole rap to go along with it now. So
yeah, there's a whole rap, there's a rhythm. I think there might even be that's a hip hop song. I think the one I heard is in that spirit though, where
Mhm.
it's just him, his quotation, but it's a house beat with less words. It's just, a nice rhythm, that
Yeah.
inspires terpsichore, dancing, right? So
Thank you for that doctor, that PhD level word.
I love the word. So yeah, we have our fake news of the day,
All
and
right.
again, it's really sad the speed at which misinformation and disinformation can
Yeah,
be put out
certainly.
to a public that may not have the depth of understanding, whether it is intentional or it's just because they don't have the skills in which to navigate these spaces that are meant to mislead people. So we have to be on a constant alert, Derek. And I know that is important to you as well.
Oh, certainly. Thank you.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
with that, we'll wrap up our 20th episode of the Capitol Press Club Legacy Podcast. I'm Dr. Frank with my man Derek Kennedy, and we're out.